A simple act of kindness changed this single dad's life forever. Evan Smith didn't realize the last normal moment with his daughter would happen on a freezing December night. Welcome to Stories by Mr. Gideon, where every tale reminds us that sometimes the smallest gestures create the biggest miracles. And if you're watching this while wrapped in a blanket with hot cocoa, you're doing Christmas right. If not, well, pause this, fix that situation, then come back. We'll wait. Actually, we won't, so just hit subscribe and let's dive in. It was mid-December, and Evergreen Town looked like it had been dipped in magic. Snowflakes the size of cotton balls drifted down onto cobblestone streets that glowed with strings of warm holiday lights. The air smelled like roasted chestnuts and gingerbread, and everywhere you looked, Christmas had exploded in the best possible way. But for Evan Smith, a 36-year-old single father with kind eyes and sandy blonde hair just starting to grey at the temples, this Christmas felt heavier than most. His two daughters, 9-year-old Aria and 5-year-old Lily, had been begging him all week to take them to the holiday market, and today, finally, he had no excuses left. No emergency jobs at the construction site, no last-minute calls from clients, just him, his girls, and a town square that looked like someone had stolen it straight from a Hallmark card. Evan's old pickup truck, the one with Riley Construction painted on the side in fading letters, sat parked. Near the entrance, its bed loaded with wrapped presents he'd scraped together on a tight budget. Money was always tight. Ever since his wife Emily died 3 years ago in that accident, Evan had been running on fumes, trying to be both mother and father to 2 little girls who still asked why Mummy wasn't coming home. He'd learned to braid hair from YouTube tutorials. He'd mastered mac and cheese in 7 different variations. But Christmas? Christmas still felt like walking through a minefield of memories, each decoration a reminder of what they'd lost. Aria grabbed his left hand, her curly dark hair bouncing as she practically dragged him toward a booth selling glittering ornaments. "Daddy, Daddy, look at the angels," she squealed, her breath forming tiny clouds in the cold air. Lily, quieter and gentler, tugged his right hand toward a cotton candy stand, her golden brown braids swaying. "Can I have one too?" she whispered, those big eyes looking up at him like he hung the moon. Evan reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and bought them both treats. The smile on Lily's face when that pink cloud of sugar hit her lips made every double shift worth it. In these moments, watching his daughters light up like the Christmas tree behind them, Evan could almost forget the ache in his chest. Almost. They wandered through the market like tourists in their own town. Past jolly snowmen with carrot noses. Past toy soldiers standing guard at shop entrances. A brass quartet played Silent Night on a makeshift stage, and Victorian-dressed carolers sang about joy and peace, while actual joy and peace felt like concepts Evan had only read about in books. Then came the moment every kid waits for. Santa Claus, in all his red-suited glory, sitting on a throne that looked more expensive than Evan's truck. Aria climbed onto Santa's lap with zero hesitation, rattling off her wish list like she was presenting a business proposal. A snow globe. That was all she wanted. Meanwhile, Lily whispered her wish so quietly that even Santa had to lean in. When it was over, Lily ran back to Evan and pressed her lips to his ear. "I told him, I want Mummy to send us a friend," she breathed. Evan's throat tightened. Out of the mouths of babes. They ended the evening at the massive Christmas tree in the town square, the one that had to be at least 30 feet tall, covered in lights that danced and twinkled like captured stars. Families clustered around, snapping photos, making memories. Evan pulled out his phone, crouched down, and wrapped his arms around both girls. Lily clung to his arm. Aria threw herself into a hug that nearly knocked him over. And for just a second, in that flash of the camera, they looked like a complete family. Not a broken one. Not one missing a vital piece. Just complete. But completeness is funny like that. You don't know you're about to lose it until it's already slipping through your fingers. After the market, Evan made a spontaneous decision, the kind that would change everything. "How about Winter Wonderland?" he asked, and the girls exploded with excitement. Winter Wonderland was the seasonal amusement park just outside town, the place where childhood dreams went to ride roller coasters and eat too much candy. They piled into the truck, drove through snow-covered pines, and arrived at an entrance decorated like a gingerbread house. The banner overhead read, "Welcome to Snowflake Festival," in letters made of icicle lights. The girls beelined for a carousel adorned with reindeer and glittering unicorns. Evan lifted Lily onto a horse that moved so gently it might as well have been floating. Arya chose a unicorn that sparkled like it had been dipped in diamonds. Evan stood at the edge, hands shoved in his pockets, watching them spin under colored lights that reflected off their happy faces. This was why he worked himself to exhaustion. For these moments, for their laughter, for the chance to give them something beautiful in a world that had already taken so much. He bought them hot chocolate afterward, then cotton candy again because, apparently, sugar was the universal language of childhood happiness. They stood in line for the Ferris wheel, Lily bouncing on her toes, Arya already planning which seat they'd take. That's when Evan noticed her, near the giant Ferris wheel, lit up in blue and red lights that made the snow around it glow. A little girl sat alone on a wooden bench. She looked about 5 or 6, maybe Lily's age. She wore a puffy red winter coat and a woolen hat with a snowflake pattern, but instead of squealing with delight like every other kid in the park, she was crying. Not the loud, dramatic cry of a tantrum, the quiet, hiccuping cry of a child who was terrified. Arya saw her first. "Daddy, look. That little girl is crying." Lily's eyes went wide. Why is she sad? Evan felt something tighten in his chest, that paternal instinct that kicks in whether the kid is yours or not. He remembered being lost once as a child, that nauseating feeling of looking around and realizing your parent wasn't there. The way the world suddenly felt too big and too scary and too cold. "Let's go see if we can help," Evan said, and with Lily holding the little girl's right hand and Arya holding her left, they approached. Lily, in the bravest voice her 5-year-old self could muster, asked, "Are you lost? Do you need help finding your mummy?" The girl looked up, her eyes red and watery, her face streaked with tears. "My mom," she hiccuped. "I can't find my mummy. Her name was Ruby." That's all she managed to say between sobs. Just Ruby. Evan crouched down to her level, eye to eye, the way he did with his own daughters when the world felt too big. "Hey there, sweetie. My name is Evan, and these are my daughters, Arya and Lily. Don't you worry. We're going to help you find your mom." Ruby practically collapsed into him, her little body shaking with cold and fear. He wrapped his arms around her, felt her trembling, and something inside him shifted. This wasn't just about helping a lost kid. This felt important, like the universe had put him here, in this exact spot, for this exact moment. Lily wrapped her spare scarf around Ruby's shoulders. Arya offered her a sip of hot chocolate. The 3 girls huddled together on that bench, while Evan stood and surveyed Winter Wonderland with new urgency. The sun had set. The fairy lights glowed brighter in the growing darkness. The park was emptying out, families heading home, and somewhere in this place, a mother was losing her mind looking for her daughter. Evan pulled out his phone and dialed the number posted on the nearest help sign. The call rang and rang. Voicemail. He tried again. This time, a man's voice answered, calm and professional, the voice of someone trained for these situations. "We heard about a lost child," the voice said. "Is this Mr. Smith?" Evan blinked. How did they already know his name? "Yes. I'm with her now. Her name is Ruby." There was a pause, some muffled conversation in the background, and then the man said, "Stay where you are. Ruby's mother is on her way." Evan looked down at Ruby, still clutching the stuffed reindeer she must have gotten from Santa earlier. Her tears had slowed, but her eyes were still red, her breath still shaky. Lily sat next to her, humming Jingle Bells like it was the most natural thing in the world. Arya kept watch, scanning the crowd like a tiny sentinel. And then, through the glow of Christmas lights and the soft fall of snow, a woman appeared, tall, elegant, dressed in a deep blue coat and a green wool scarf, her long black braids decorated with tiny holiday ornaments. Even in her panic, even with tears streaming down her face, she moved with a grace that made people step aside. "Ruby!" she cried, dropping to her knees and pulling her daughter into her arms. "Oh, thank God you're safe." Ruby buried her face in her mother's scarf, and the woman held her like she'd never let go. When she finally looked up, her eyes met Evan's. "Sir," she said, her voice thick with gratitude and relief, "I don't know how to thank you." Evan dipped his head, suddenly aware of his old coat and scuffed boots. "No need to thank me." She was cold. "I have 2 daughters. I couldn't walk away." The woman smiled, and it was the kind of smile that could melt snow. "I'm Sydney Ellis," she said, extending her hand. "And this little ray of sunshine is Ruby." Sydney Ellis. The name meant nothing to Evan. But something about the way people in the background watched her, the way staff members nodded with deference, made him wonder, who was this woman? And why did helping her daughter feel like stepping into something much bigger than a simple act of kindness? Here's the question I want you to think about. When you help someone, do you ever wonder if you're not just changing their life but your own? Because Evan Smith was about to find out that the answer wasn't just yes, it was everything. If you want to know what happens next, stay tuned. And hey, if this story warmed your heart more than your 3rd cup of cocoa, smash that like button and subscribe to Stories by Mr. Gideon. We've got more tales that'll make you believe in Christmas miracles. Now grab those cookies, settle in, and let's see where this story takes us. Sydney Ellis reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a business card that would make Evan question everything he thought he knew about chance encounters. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. Let's rewind to that moment in Winter Wonderland, where a simple thank you was about to become something far more complicated. Sydney stood there in the glow of Christmas lights, her daughter Ruby clinging to her, sighed, and looked at Evan Smith like he'd just pulled her child from a burning building. Which, in a way, he had. Fear is its own kind of fire, and Ruby had been burning with it. "I cannot thank you enough," Sydney said again, her voice steadier now but still trembling at the edges. She brushed a strand of Ruby's dark hair away from the child's tear-stained face. "When I realized she was gone, She couldn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Evan knew that terror. Every parent does. That split second when you look away and your child vanishes, and suddenly, the world becomes a nightmare, dressed up as an amusement park. Evan shook his head, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Really, it's okay. I just did what anyone would do." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. How many people had walked past Ruby on that bench? How many had seen a crying child and decided it wasn't their problem, in a world where everyone's got their phones out recording everything? But nobody wants to get involved. Evan had chosen differently. And Sydney Ellis had noticed. "Not everyone would stop," Sydney said quietly, as if reading his thoughts. "Trust me on that." There was something in her tone, something that suggested she'd learned this lesson the hard way. She glanced down at Arya and Lily, who were still fussing over Ruby like she was a baby bird they'd rescued. "Your daughters are beautiful. You've raised them well." Evan felt his chest tighten with that mix of pride and grief that always came when someone complimented his parenting. "I'm doing my best," he said. "Their mom. She passed away a few years back, so it's just the 3 of us now." He hadn't meant to share that. The words just slipped out, drawn by something in Sydney's eyes that felt safe. Sydney's expression shifted, softened. "I'm so sorry," she said, and it wasn't the empty condolence people usually offered. It was real, raw, like she understood loss on a cellular level. "Ruby's father died when she was 2, so I know what it's like, trying to be everything for them." She paused, looking at her daughter with a mixture of love and exhaustion that Evan recognized in his own mirror. "I know what it's like to be terrified you're not enough." And there it was, the connection. 2 single parents, both widowed, both terrified, both trying to build Christmas magic out of grief and determination, standing in a winter wonderland that suddenly felt a lot less like fantasy and a lot more like fate. But here's what Evan didn't know yet. What Sydney wasn't saying, the woman standing in front of him in her modest blue coat and simple green scarf wasn't just any single mother struggling to make ends meet. Sydney Ellis was about to shatter every assumption Evan had made in the last 10 minutes. The question is, would the truth bring them closer together or drive them irreversibly apart? A park security officer approached, radio crackling on his hip. "Miss Ellis," he said with a deference that made Evan's radar ping. "I'm glad we found Ruby. Is everything all right?" Sydney nodded, thanking him, and the officer gave Evan a respectful nod. "You did a good thing here, sir." After he left, Sydney turned back to Evan, and for a moment she looked like she wanted to say something important. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "I know this might sound forward," she finally said, "but would you let me buy you and your daughters something warm to drink? There's a cafe just outside the park. I'd really like to properly thank you, and it's the least I can do." She glanced at the girls, all three of them now giggling about something only children find hilarious. "Besides, I think our daughters have already become friends." Evan hesitated. Every instinct told him this was where polite people said goodbye, exchanged pleasantries, and went back to their separate lives. But Lily was already tugging his sleeve, her eyes pleading. Aria had that look on her face, the one that said she'd already decided they were going, and Dad just needed to catch up. And something in Sydney's expression, vulnerable and hopeful, made him think that maybe, just maybe, saying yes was exactly what this Christmas needed. "All right," Evan said, surprising himself. "That sounds good." The cafe Sydney led them to wasn't just good. It was the kind of place Evan usually walked past without even considering. Warm golden light spilled through frosted windows. Inside, exposed brick walls were decorated with vintage Christmas ornaments and strings of Edison bulbs. A fireplace crackled in the corner. Soft jazz versions of holiday classics played from invisible speakers. The whole place smelled like cinnamon and expensive coffee, and Evan, suddenly, became very aware of his work boots and the small paint stain on his jeans. They settled into a corner booth, the three girls squeezing together on one side, Evan and Sydney on the other. A waitress appeared almost instantly, greeting Sydney by name. "Miss Ellis, wonderful to see you." "The usual." Sydney smiled and ordered hot chocolates for the girls, coffee for herself. And when Evan stammered something about "whatever's fine," she ordered him a cappuccino with the confidence of someone who'd never had to check a price tag. While they waited, Ruby pulled out the stuffed reindeer she'd been clutching and showed it to Lily. "Santa gave it to me," she said softly, her earlier tears completely forgotten in the way only children can forget trauma. "Before I got lost," Lily's eyes went wide. "We saw Santa too. I wished for Mummy to send us a friend." She said it so innocently, so openly, that both Evan and Sydney went quiet. Sometimes kids have a way of saying the exact right thing at the exact wrong time. Or maybe it was the exact right time. Hard to tell. Sydney caught Evan's eye across the table, and something passed between them. Understanding, recognition, the silent language of parents who've had to explain death to someone too young to understand it. "Well," Sydney said gently to Lily, "maybe Santa's really good at his job, because you found Ruby, didn't you?" Lily nodded enthusiastically, and just like that, the heaviness lifted. The drinks arrived, and as the girls busied themselves with whipped cream and chocolate-covered, stirring sticks, Sydney leaned back and looked at Evan with curious eyes. "So, Evan Smith, tell me about yourself. Besides being a hero who rescues lost children," she said it with a slight smile, teasing but kind. Evan laughed, uncomfortable with the hero label. "Not much to tell. I run a small construction company, Riley Construction. We do residential work mostly, renovations, additions, that kind of thing." He wrapped his hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to do with them. "It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills. Mostly." "There's nothing unglamorous about building things," Sydney said with surprising intensity. "My father was a mechanic. My mother taught elementary school. I grew up watching them work with their hands, create things, fix things. There's honor in that." She took a sip of her coffee. People forget that not everyone gets to sit in boardrooms and push paper around. The world runs on people like your parents, like you. Evan studied her. There was something about the way she talked, the way she carried herself. Education mixed with humility, elegance mixed with earthiness, like she'd walked in both worlds and refused to forget where she came from. "What about you?" he asked. "What do you do?" Sydney's smile flickered, just for a second. "I work with a family foundation. Charity work, mostly. Fundraising, community outreach, that sort of thing." She said it casually, like it was no big deal, but Evan noticed she didn't elaborate. Didn't mention which foundation, didn't drop names. It was the kind of vague answer people gave when they didn't want to talk about work, or when talking about work would reveal more than they wanted to reveal. Before Evan could press, Sydney shifted topics. "Christmas traditions," she said, her eyes lighting up. "Tell me about yours. I need to know if I'm the only parent who still insists on homemade ornaments and handwritten letters to Santa." And just like that, they were off. Evan found himself telling her about his dad's woodcarving, about Christmas Eve spent in the workshop, making toys, about the year he and his father built Aria a dollhouse completely from scratch. Sydney shared stories about her grandmother's kitchen, about gospel choirs on the radio, about the tradition of giving away half of what you received so you never forgot that Christmas was about others. An hour passed, then another. The girls had migrated to a kids' corner. The cafe kept stocked with books and coloring supplies. Every so often, one would run back to show them a drawing or report some crucial development in their play. But mostly it was just Evan and Sydney, talking like old friends, like people who'd known each other for years instead of hours. "I miss it," Sydney said quietly, staring into her coffee cup. "The simplicity. When Christmas was about showing up and being together, not about—" She trailed off, seeming to catch herself. "Sorry, I'm rambling." "Not about what?" Evan pressed gently. Sydney looked at him, and for a moment he saw something complicated flash across her face. Longing mixed with regret. "Not about expectations," she finally said. "Not about doing everything perfectly or making sure everyone's impressed. Just being—" Evan nodded slowly. "I know what you mean. Since Emily died, every Christmas feels like I'm performing, like I'm trying to be two parents at once and failing at both." He hadn't meant to be that honest, but something about Sydney made honesty feel safe. "You're not failing," Sydney said firmly, reaching across the table to touch his hand. Just a brief touch, barely a second. But Evan felt it like electricity. "Those girls adore you. Anyone can see that." The moment stretched, suspended in the warm cafe light and the soft jazz and the sound of their daughters laughing. Evan realized he was happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Not performing happiness for the girls, not pretending, just happy. When was the last time that happened? Eventually, the cafe owner politely mentioned they were closing soon. Outside, the snow had picked up, coating the world in fresh white. They bundled the girls into their coats and walked slowly toward the parking lot, nobody quite ready for the evening to end. "This was really nice," Evan said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Thank you for everything." Sydney smiled, but there was something bittersweet in it. "No, thank you. I haven't had a conversation like that I can't remember how long." She looked down at Ruby, who was holding both Aria's and Lily's hands like they were precious treasures. And Ruby clearly found her people. They reached Sydney's car first, and Evan stopped dead. It wasn't the old sedan he'd expected. It was a sleek black Mercedes, the kind that cost more than Evan made in 2 years. Maybe 3. It gleamed under the parking lot lights, looking completely out of place next to the family minivans and practical SUVs. Sydney caught his expression and laughed, but it sounded forced. "Company car," she said quickly. "The foundation provides it." She clicked the key fob, and the car chirped to life. Evan nodded, but his brain was working overtime. What kind of foundation provided cars like that? What kind of charity work paid for Mercedes-Benz sedans? He thought about the way the security guard had spoken to her, the way the cafe waitress had known her by name, the vague description of her job. Sydney seemed to sense his confusion. Evan, she started, then stopped. Can I call you? Maybe we could do this again sometime. I think the girls would love it, and She smiled, genuine this time. I'd love it too. Evan felt his phone buzz and realized she was texting him her number through some kind of contact share. He pulled out his phone, saw the name pop up. Sydney Ellis. Below it, no job title, no company, just a number. Yeah, he heard himself say. Yeah, I'd like that. They said their goodbyes, Ruby waving frantically from the back seat as Sydney pulled away. Evan watched the taillights disappear into the snowy night, and something in his gut told him this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Dad? Arya asked from beside him. She's really nice. Yeah, honey. She is. Are you going to see her again? Evan looked down at his daughter's hopeful face. I think so. Good, Lily chimed in, taking his other hand. Because Ruby is my friend now, and friends have to see each other. In the mouths of babes, Evan thought again. In the mouths of babes, 3 days passed. 3 days where Evan threw himself into work, into finishing a renovation project before Christmas, into anything that would stop him from checking his phone every 5 minutes to see if Sydney had texted. She hadn't. Maybe it had been just a polite gesture. Maybe she'd gotten home, remembered her real life, and decided that a construction worker with 2 kids and a beat-up truck wasn't worth pursuing. Maybe his phone rang. Unknown number. Evan almost didn't answer. But something made him swipe. Hello? Evan? It's Sydney. Sydney Ellis. From Winter Wonderland. His heart did something stupid in his chest. Sydney, hi. I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me. Forgotten? She laughed, and it sounded relieved. No, I've been trying to work up the courage to call me. It's complicated, Sydney said, and Evan could hear her moving around, maybe pacing. Listen, I know this might seem forward, but I'm hosting a small event tomorrow evening. A Christmas charity thing at the city centre. Nothing fancy, just some hot cider and music, raising money for the community centre. I'd love for you and your daughters to come. As my guests. Evan's mind raced. A charity event. At the city centre. That was the nice part of town. The part where people wore clothes that cost more than his monthly mortgage. Sydney, I don't know if we'd really fit in at something like that. Please, Sydney interrupted, and there was something vulnerable in her voice. I want you there. I want the girls there. It would mean a lot to me. How do you say no to that? You don't. Okay, Evan said. What time? 6 o'clock. I'll text you the address. And Evan? She paused. Thank you for saying yes. After she hung up, Evan stared at his phone for a full minute. What had he just agreed to? And why did it feel like he'd just said yes to something much bigger than a charity event? The next evening, Evan stood in front of his bathroom mirror, wearing the one good sweater he owned, a green knit thing he'd borrowed from his dad years ago and never returned. It still smelled faintly of his father's cologne, and wearing it made him feel both protected and exposed. Arya appeared in the doorway, wearing her nicest velvet dress and the snowflake pin Emily had given her before she died. Lily had squeezed herself into her favorite reindeer sweater, the one with actual jingle bells sewn onto it. Do we look okay, Daddy? Arya asked, suddenly nervous. Evan crouched down and straightened Lily's collar. You both look perfect, beautiful. Are there going to be fancy people there? Lily whispered. Maybe, Evan admitted. But we're going to be ourselves, okay? That's all we can be. They piled into the family sedan, the one that definitely wasn't a Mercedes, and followed the GPS to an address that made Evan's stomach sink. The city centre wasn't just in the nice part of town. It was the centerpiece of the nice part of town. A modern building of glass and steel, lit up like a beacon. As they pulled into the parking lot, Evan saw a banner stretched across the entrance, Holiday Warmth Gala, in support of Hollyfield Community Centre, Gala. Sydney had called it a small event. This was not a small event. People in expensive coats and designer scarves walked toward the entrance, laughing and chatting like they attended galas every week, which they probably did. Evan looked down at his borrowed sweater and scuffed dress shoes and felt like an imposter. But Arya and Lily were already unbuckling their seatbelts, excited by the lights and decorations, and there was no turning back now. Inside, the center had been transformed into something out of a magazine spread. A massive Christmas tree dominated one corner, decorated in silver and gold. Tables were set up with craft stations where kids painted ornaments. A small band played soft holiday jazz. People milled around with crystal glasses of what Evan assumed was expensive cider, chatting in clusters. Their laughter warm and comfortable in the way that comes from never having to worry about money. Evan. He turned, and there was Sydney, gliding toward them in a grey wool dress and cashmere shawl, looking elegant and poised and completely at home. She greeted the girls first, crouching down to admire Lily's Jingle Bell sweater and compliment Arya's pin. Then she stood and smiled at Evan, and he saw relief in her eyes. "You came. I'm so glad. We wouldn't miss it," Evan said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Sydney took Lily's hand and led them toward the children's area, where Ruby was painting a ceramic ornament with intense concentration. The three girls squealed and hugged like they hadn't seen each other in years instead of days. Sydney watched them with a soft smile, then turned to Evan. "I need to make the rounds," she said apologetically. "Host duties. But please, help yourself to food, drinks, whatever you want. I'll find you in a bit, okay?" Evan nodded, and Sydney disappeared into the crowd. But as she walked away, he noticed something. People moved aside for her, not in an obvious way, but in a subtle shift, like water, parting around a stone, and they watched her, not with curiosity, but with deference, with respect. "Mr. Riley?" Evan turned to find an older woman in pearls and a velvet blazer smiling at him. "I'm Megan Hartwell. I volunteer here at the center. Ms. Ellis mentioned you'd be coming." She said Ms. Ellis the way people say the president or the queen, with weight, with reverence. "Nice to meet you," Evan managed. "We're so grateful for what you did," Megan continued, finding Ruby like that. Sydney was beside herself. We've never seen her so shaken. She leaned in, conspiratorially. "She's usually the one holding everything together, you know." It was good to see that even she has a vulnerable side. Evan wanted to ask what she meant by even she, but Megan had already moved on to greet someone else. He stood there, holding a cup of cider he didn't remember picking up, watching Sydney work the room. She stopped at each cluster of people, touching arms, laughing at jokes, thanking volunteers. She was magnetic, confident, every inch the woman in charge. Who was Sydney Ellis? An hour passed. Evan helped Arya paint a glass ornament with meticulous detail. He watched Lily dominate the cookie decorating station, covering everything in so much frosting it was basically inedible. He chatted with other parents, other volunteers, all of whom mentioned Sydney with that same tone of reverence mixed with genuine affection. Then the lights dimmed slightly, and a voice came over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, if we could have your attention, please. Miss Ellis would like to say a few words." The crowd quieted and shifted toward a small stage at the front of the room. Sydney climbed the steps, took the microphone, and suddenly the entire space felt different. Smaller, more intimate, like she could speak to each person individually. "Good evening, everyone," Sydney began, her voice warm and strong. "Thank you so much for coming to our Holiday Warmth Gala. This year we've raised a record amount for Hollyfield Community Center." Applause rippled through the room. "But tonight, I want to share something more personal." Evan felt his throat tighten. He knew what was coming. "A few days ago, my daughter Ruby got separated from me at Winter Wonderland," Sydney continued, her voice steady but emotional. "For those of you who are parents, you know that terror, that moment when you realize your child is gone and the world becomes unbearable." She paused, collecting herself. But Ruby wasn't alone. A kind stranger found her, a man who had no reason to stop, who could have walked right past, but who chose instead to help. The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "That man is here tonight. His name is Evan Smith, and he reminded me that Christmas miracles aren't about grand gestures or big moments. They're about small acts of kindness from people who see someone in need and decide to care." Sydney's eyes found Evan's across the room. "Evan, would you come up here, please?" Every eye in the room turned to him. Evan felt his face go hot. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to be on display. But Aria was pushing him forward, Lily was bouncing with excitement, and Sydney was smiling at him from the stage with such warmth that his feet started moving before his brain could object. He climbed the steps, and Sydney took his hand. "Everyone, this is Evan Smith and his beautiful daughters, Aria and Lily. Because of Evan's kindness, I want to give something back." She gestured to someone off stage, and a young man appeared carrying a wrapped box. Sydney opened it to reveal 4 certificates. A weekend family retreat at Pine Lodge Resort, all expenses paid, as a thank you from my family to yours. The crowd erupted in applause. Evan stood there, frozen, staring at the certificates like they were written in a foreign language. Pine Lodge Resort. That place cost more per night than he made in a week. This was too much, way too much. "Ms. Ellis," he started, his voice barely audible over the applause. "Sydney," she corrected gently, still holding his hand. "Sydney, I can't accept this. It's too much." "It's not enough," Sydney said firmly. "You gave me back my daughter. This is just a small gesture." She pressed the certificates into his hands and leaned in close enough that only he could hear. "Please, Evan, let me do this. You've earned it." Have you ever been in a situation where saying no would be more awkward than saying yes? Where refusing would actually cause more hurt than accepting? Evan looked down at those certificates, then out at the crowd, then back at Sydney's hopeful face, and realized he was trapped. Trapped by kindness, trapped by generosity, trapped by the sudden, uncomfortable awareness that he'd stepped into a world he didn't understand. "Thank you," he managed, his voice thick. Thank you." More applause. Sydney squeezed his hand once more before releasing it, and Evan practically fled the stage. Aria and Lily mobbed him at the bottom, squealing about the resort, about having a real vacation, about how this was the best Christmas ever. But Evan's mind was spinning. Who gives away $1,000 resort packages as a small gesture? Who hosts galas and gets treated like royalty by everyone in the room? Who drives a Mercedes but talks about humble beginnings and mechanic fathers? Evan found himself standing near the Christmas tree, watching Sydney finish her speech and thank everyone for coming. She was gracious, eloquent, at ease in front of hundreds of people. This wasn't the woman who'd sat in a cafe and opened up about struggling with expectations. This was someone else, someone powerful, someone important, someone completely out of his league. "She's amazing, isn't she?" Evan turned to find an elderly man in an expensive suit standing beside him. "I'm sorry?" "Sydney," the man clarified. "Sydney Ellis. She's done incredible things for this community. The Ellis Foundation has donated millions over the years, millions, and she runs it all now. After her parents passed, he sipped his champagne. We're lucky to have her. The Ellis Foundation, millions, runs it all." Evan's brain finally connected the dots he'd been trying to ignore. Sydney Ellis, the Ellis Foundation, that massive charitable organization he'd heard about on the news, the one that funded schools and hospitals and community centers across 3 states. That Ellis Foundation. Sydney wasn't just wealthy, she was wealthy. Capital W, generational wealth, foundation running, gala throwing, Mercedes driving, influence-wielding wealth. And Evan Smith was a construction worker who drove a 15-year-old sedan and wore his dead father's sweater to fancy events. What the hell had he gotten himself into? The gala was winding down. Families collected their children from craft stations. Volunteers began discreetly cleaning up. Sydney made her way back to Evan, looking tired but happy. "So," she asked hopefully, "did you have a good time?" "It was incredible," Evan said honestly. The girls loved it. But Sydney, I need to ask you something. Her smile faltered slightly. Okay, why didn't you tell me? About the foundation, about... He gestured vaguely at the room, at the banner, at everything. About all of this. Sydney's face fell. She glanced around, then gently guided him toward a quieter corner. Because, she said softly, the moment people know, everything changes. They see the money instead of me. They want something, or they get intimidated, or they treat me like I'm fragile and need protecting. She looked up at him with those eyes that had first caught him at Winter Wonderland. When you found Ruby, you didn't know who I was. You helped because it was the right thing to do. And at the cafe, you talked to me like I was just... Sydney. Just a single mom trying to figure things out. Do you know how rare that is? Evan felt his anger deflate. Because he understood. God help him, he understood. So, this whole thing tonight, the gala, the gift, was it about thanking me or about showing me who you really are? Both, Sydney admitted. I wanted to thank you properly, but I also wanted you to know the truth before. She trailed off. Before what? Sydney took a breath. Before I asked if you'd like to have coffee again, just the two of us. No girls, no galas, no foundations. Just two people who maybe, she smiled nervously, maybe could be friends, or more. If you're interested, there it was. The question Evan had been both hoping for and dreading. Because yes, he was interested, desperately interested. But how could this possibly work? She lived in a world of galas and foundations and million-dollar donations. He lived in a world of mortgage payments and construction sites and figuring out how to pay for braces. But then he thought about the cafe, about how easy it had been to talk to her, about how she'd opened up about loss and fear and struggling to be enough, about how she'd crouched down to Lily's level and complimented her Jingle Bell sweater with genuine delight. I'm interested, Evan heard himself say. But Sydney, I need you to understand something. I'm not, he gestured at himself, I'm not this. I'm just a regular guy trying to raise his kids and keep his business afloat. I can't compete with this world. I don't want you to compete, Sydney said firmly. I don't want this world. I want someone real, someone kind, someone who stops to help a crying child because it's the right thing to do, not because there might be something in it for them. She reached out and took his hand. I want someone like you. And in that moment, standing in a corner of a fancy gala in his borrowed sweater, holding hands, with a woman who could buy and sell his entire life 10 times over, Evan Smith made a choice. He chose to believe her. He chose to take the leap. He chose to see where this impossible, improbable, completely insane connection might lead. Okay, he said. Coffee. Just the two of us. Sydney's face lit up like the Christmas tree behind them. Really? Really. But you're buying. Because after seeing this place, I know for a fact you can afford it. Sydney laughed, really laughed, and it was the best sound Evan had heard all night. Deal. They left the gala together, Sydney walking them to their car, Ruby, and the girls chattering away like they'd known each other their whole lives. As Evan buckled Lily into her car seat, he caught Sydney watching him with a soft expression. What? He asked. Nothing, she said. Just thinking about how 3 days ago I was losing my mind in a winter wonderland, and now I'm... She smiled. Now I'm really glad Ruby wandered off. That's a terrible thing to be glad about, Evan said, but he was smiling too. I know. But it's true. They said goodbye, and Evan drove home through snowy streets, his mind racing. The girls fell asleep in the back seat, exhausted and happy, and Evan sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, and wondered, was he being brave or stupid? Was this a Christmas miracle or a disaster waiting to happen? But here's the thing about miracles. You don't get to choose when they show up. You don't get to decide if you're ready. You just get to choose whether you're going to run away or run toward them. And for the first time since Emily died, Evan Smith was choosing to run toward something, even if it scared him. Even if it seemed impossible, especially because it seemed impossible. Because isn't that what Christmas is really about? Believing in impossible things? having faith that somehow, against all odds, everything might just work out. But as Evan pulled into his driveway and saw the modest little house he'd poured his heart into maintaining, one question nagged at the back of his mind. Could a construction worker and a foundation heiress really build a life together? Or were they just two people from different worlds, destined to crash and burn the moment reality set in? Only time would tell. And time, as it turns out, was about to get very interesting, because Sydney Ellis had one more surprise up her designer sleeve, something she hadn't told Evan, something that would either bring them closer together or tear them completely apart. What happens when you realize the person you're falling for lives in a completely different world than you do? That question kept Evan Smith awake until 3 in the morning on Christmas Eve. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak and settle, replaying every moment of the gala in his mind. The way Sydney had looked at him on that stage, the way she'd held his hand, the way she'd asked if they could be more than friends, and the way his heart had said yes before his brain could list all the reasons why this was absolutely insane. Because it was insane, wasn't it? A construction worker and a foundation heiress, a man who clipped coupons and a woman who donated millions. A single dad in a borrowed sweater and a single mom who threw galas like other people threw dinner parties. On paper, it made no sense. In reality, it made even less sense. But somehow, in his chest, in that space where logic didn't reach, it made perfect sense. The problem with the heart is that it doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care about tax brackets or social status, or the fact that your truck is older than some of the people at that gala. The heart just wants what it wants. And Evan's heart wanted Sydney Ellis. But wanting something and having it work out are two very different things. And as the first light of Christmas Eve morning crept through his bedroom window, Evan wondered if maybe he'd made a terrible mistake by saying yes to coffee. Maybe he should call her, tell her he'd thought it over, and realized this couldn't work. Save them both the heartbreak that was inevitably coming. His phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text message from Sydney. Good morning. I know it's early, but I couldn't sleep. Keep thinking about our conversation. Still want that coffee? Or did you wake up and realize you'd agreed to have coffee with a crazy woman who throws galas and gives away resort packages? Would understand if you changed your mind. No pressure. Evan read it 3 times. The vulnerability in those words. The way she'd signed it, just like they were already close enough for shorthand. The fact that she was awake at 6 in the morning on Christmas Eve, anxious about whether he still wanted to see her. It was so human, so real, so completely at odds with the image of the powerful foundation director who'd commanded that room last night. He typed back, still want coffee. Haven't changed my mind, but fair warning, I'm probably going to be terrible at this. It's been a long time since I've done the whole dating thing. And I've never done it with someone who can buy and sell me, so patience appreciated. 3 dots appeared immediately. She was typing. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, same here. On all counts, except the buying and selling part. That came out wrong. You know what I mean. How about tomorrow? Christmas morning. I know it's unconventional, but Ruby will be with her grandparents until noon. We could meet early. Just us. Coffee and honesty. Deal. Evan smiled despite himself. Christmas morning coffee. Most people spent Christmas morning with family, opening presents, eating too much food. But most people hadn't spent the last 3 years trying to be both parents to 2 little girls. Most people hadn't forgotten what it felt like to do something just for themselves. Deal, he typed back. Where? There's a little place called Rosie's Cafe on Main Street. Family-owned, no crowds, good coffee. 7 a.m.? I'll be there. Thank you, Evan, for taking a chance on this. On me. Evan set his phone down and stared at the ceiling again. Except this time, instead of anxiety, he felt something else. Something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Actual, genuine, terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, life was about to get interesting in all the best ways. Christmas Eve with Aria and Lily was exactly what Evan needed. They spent the morning baking cookies that turned out lopsided and slightly burnt but tasted perfect anyway. They watched Christmas movies curled up on the couch, all three of them under the same blanket. They drove around the neighborhood looking at lights, Lily's jingle bell sweater jingling with every turn. And when evening came and it was time to tuck them into bed, both girls were so exhausted from excitement that they barely made it through one bedtime story before falling asleep. Evan stood in their doorway, watching them breathe, and felt that familiar tightness in his chest. The bittersweet knowledge that they were growing up, that these moments were finite, that someday they wouldn't need him like this anymore. But tonight, they were still his little girls, still young enough to believe in Santa Claus and Christmas miracles. "Emily," he whispered into the darkness, "I think I met someone. I think she might be special. I hope that's okay. I hope you'd approve." He waited, half expecting some sign, some response from the universe. But there was only silence, the good kind of silence, the kind that felt like permission. He went downstairs and spent the next 2 hours assembling presents, wrapping last-minute gifts, arranging everything under the tree so it would look magical when the girls woke up. And the whole time, part of his brain was planning what to wear tomorrow, what to say, how to be himself, while also being impressive enough that Sydney wouldn't realize she'd made a mistake. "Stop it," he told himself. "She asked you to be real. So be real." By the time he finished, it was past midnight, officially Christmas Day. Evan made himself a cup of hot chocolate, sat in his favorite chair by the tree, and let himself imagine what tomorrow might bring. Coffee with Sydney. Real conversation. No galas, no daughters, no distractions. Just two people trying to figure out if this impossible thing between them could actually work. But here's what Evan didn't know. Here's what was about to make Christmas Day either the best or worst day of his life. Sydney Ellis had a plan, and that plan was going to change everything. 7 a.m. came fast. Too fast. Evan woke to his alarm after maybe 3 hours of sleep, showered, shaved, changed clothes 4 times before settling on jeans and a sweater that didn't look like he was trying too hard. He left a note for the girls. "Santa came. Stay in bed until I get back. Presents at 8:30. Love, Dad." Then he slipped out into the cold Christmas morning. The streets were empty, silent. Snow had fallen overnight, covering everything in fresh white. The whole world felt paused, like it was holding its breath. Rosie's Cafe was a small brick building tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop, with frosted windows and a neon open sign that glowed red in the pre-dawn darkness. Inside, it was warm and smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. An older woman behind the counter looked up and smiled. "Merry Christmas, honey. You meeting someone?" She said it like she already knew the answer. "Yeah," Evan admitted. "How do you know?" "Because you've got that look. That, I'm about to do something that might change my life." "Look," she winked. "Booth in the back. Coffee's on the house today. Christmas gift." Evan thanked her and made his way to the back booth, sliding into the worn vinyl seat. He was early. 5 minutes early, which meant he had 5 minutes to panic about everything that could go wrong. What if they had nothing to talk about without the girls as buffers? What if the chemistry from the cafe was just adrenaline from finding Ruby? What if Sydney took one look at him in the cold light of day and realized he was just an ordinary guy with nothing special to offer? The bell above the door chimed. Sydney Ellis walked in, and Evan forgot how to breathe. She wasn't wearing a designer dress or a cashmere shawl. She was wearing jeans, regular jeans, slightly faded at the knees, a red sweater that looked soft and comfortable. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No jewelry except small silver earrings. No makeup that he could see. She looked like any other woman coming in for morning coffee. Except she was the most beautiful woman Evan had ever seen. Their eyes met across the cafe. Sydney smiled, nervous and hopeful, and walked over. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi," Evan managed. "Is this seat taken?" She gestured to the bench across from him. "Only if you're Sydney Ellis. Otherwise it's reserved." She laughed and slid into the seat. "Lucky for you, I happen to be Sydney Ellis. The older woman appeared with 2 coffees and set them down with a knowing smile. "Merry Christmas, kids. Holler if you need anything." Then she disappeared, leaving them alone in the quiet cafe. For a moment, neither of them spoke, just looked at each other over steaming coffee cups, both trying to figure out where to start, how to bridge the gap between strangers and something more. Finally, Sydney broke the silence. "I'm nervous," she admitted, "which is ridiculous because we've already spent hours together. But this feels different." "Because it is different," Evan said. "This is just us. No crisis bringing us together, no kids as cover. Just us." "Just us," Sydney echoed. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup. "So, full disclosure time. Full disclosure time." Sydney took a breath. "Okay, here's the truth. The Ellis Foundation was started by my grandparents 50 years ago. Small at first, just helping out their community. But it grew, a lot. My parents took it over and grew it even more. When they died in a car accident 6 years ago, it all came to me. The foundation, the responsibility, the money, all of it." She looked down at her coffee. "And I've been drowning in it ever since." Evan waited, sensing there was more. "People think money solves problems," Sydney continued. "And sometimes it does, but it also creates them. Everyone wants something. Everyone has a cause they think I should fund. Everyone has an opinion on how I should use my family's legacy. And I'm so tired, Evan. So tired of being Sydney Ellis, Foundation Director, of having to be perfect and gracious and always on." She looked up at him, and her eyes were shining. "When you found Ruby, you didn't see any of that. You just saw a scared little girl who needed help. And when we had coffee, you talked to me like I was just a person. Do you know how long it's been since someone talked to me like I was just a person?" Evan felt something shift in his chest. "Sydney, I'm not finished," she said quickly. "I need to say this. When I asked you to that gala, part of me wanted to test you to see if you'd treat me differently once you knew. And you did treat me differently, but not in the way I expected. You got uncomfortable. You thought about leaving, but then you decided to. Give me a chance anyway. You chose to see past the money and the foundation and all the rest of it. And that's why I'm sitting here right now, on Christmas morning, when I could be with my daughter, because I think you might be the most genuine person I've met in years." The cafe was so quiet, Evan could hear his own heartbeat. "Can I talk now?" he asked. Sydney laughed wetly. "Yes. Please." "Okay, full disclosure from my end. I'm terrified. Absolutely terrified. Because yes, I like you, a lot. More than I've liked anyone since my wife died. But I have no idea how this is supposed to work. You live in a world I don't understand. You have resources I can't even imagine. And I'm just a guy who builds things and tries to keep his daughters fed and happy. I don't know how to date someone who throws galas. I don't know what I'm supposed to bring to this equation that you couldn't get from someone in your own tax bracket." "You bring yourself," Sydney said simply. "That's what you bring. Your kindness, your integrity, your dad jokes and your terrible timing, and the way you look at your daughters like they hung the moon. That's what I want, Evan. Not someone who can match my bank account, someone who can match my heart." And there it was, the moment where everything either fell apart or came together. Evan looked at Sydney Ellis, really looked at her, and saw past the money and the foundation and the designer car. He saw a woman who'd lost her parents and her husband, a woman who was raising a daughter alone, a woman who was tired of forming and just wanted to be seen. He saw someone exactly like him. "Okay," Evan said. "Let's figure this out, together. No promises about how it's going to work or where it's going to lead. Just, let's try." Sydney's face broke into the most genuine smile he'd seen from her yet. "Yeah?" "Yeah." They talked for 2 hours straight, about everything and nothing, about their childhoods and their fears and their hopes for their daughters, about how hard it was to be a single parent, about how guilty they felt when they took time for themselves, about Christmas traditions and favorite movies, and whether Die Hard counted as a Christmas movie. They laughed until they cried and got serious, and then laughed again. The older woman brought them cinnamon rolls without asking and freshened their coffee 3 times. Other customers trickled in, Christmas morning early birds, but Evan and Sydney barely noticed. They were in their own bubble, discovering each other, building something fragile and precious and terrifying. Finally, Sydney glanced at her phone and sighed. "I need to go pick up Ruby soon. Her grandparents are expecting me, and I need to get home to the girls," Evan said. "They're probably bouncing off the walls waiting for presents." They stood, neither quite ready to leave. Sydney reached out and took Evan's hand. "Thank you," she said, "for this. For taking a chance. Thank you for asking me to take it." They walked outside into bright Christmas morning sunshine. The snow sparkled like someone had scattered diamonds on it. Sydney's car was parked right next to Evan's truck, the Mercedes and the beat-up Ford sitting side by side like an odd couple. "That's kind of perfect, isn't it?" Sydney said, nodding at the vehicles. "Your truck and my car, different worlds, same parking lot." Evan laughed. "Are we the cars in this metaphor? Maybe. Or maybe we're just 2 people who met at exactly the right moment." She squeezed his hand. "Evan, I know this is fast. I know we barely know each other. But would you consider bringing the girls over this afternoon? Ruby would love to see Aria and Lily. And I'd love to see you. In a totally non-stalker way. You sure? Christmas afternoon is usually sacred family time." "Exactly," Sydney said. "So come be family with us." Family. The word hung in the cold air between them, full of possibility. "What time?" Evan asked. 2 o'clock? I'll text you the address. We'll be there." Sydney stood on her tiptoes and kissed his cheek. Just a quick, soft kiss that lasted maybe 2 seconds, but felt like an earthquake. "Merry Christmas, Evan Smith." "Merry Christmas, Sydney Ellis." He watched her drive away, then sat in his truck for a full minute, touching his cheek where she'd kissed him, wondering if any of this was actually real. Then his phone buzzed with a text from Aria. "Dad, where are you? Santa came, and we're dying." He laughed and drove home, where 2 very impatient daughters were indeed bouncing off walls. They tore through presents with the kind of joy that made all the double shifts worth it. Aria screamed over the snow globe she'd asked Santa for. Lily hugged her new stuffed animal, so hard Evan worried she might suffocate it. And when it was all over, when the living room looked like a wrapping paper bomb had exploded, both girls turned to him with shining eyes. "Best Christmas ever," Aria declared. "Best Christmas ever," Lily agreed. And Evan thought about Sydney's kiss and the coffee and the way she had looked at him like he was something special, and thought, yeah, maybe it is. At 1:30, he loaded the girls back into the truck with the instructions to dress nice but comfortable, which resulted in Aria choosing her snow globe dress and Lily insisting on the Jingle Bell sweater again, because Ruby likes it. They drove to the address Sydney had texted, and Evan's stomach dropped when he realized they were heading to Riverside Estates, the neighborhood where houses had names instead of just numbers. Sydney's house was, well, house was the wrong word. Estate was more accurate. A sprawling colonial with white pillars and black shutters, surrounded by perfectly manicured hedges dusted with snow. The driveway alone was bigger than Evan's entire lot. "Whoa," Aria breathed. "Does Ruby live in a castle?" Lily asked. "Something like that," Evan muttered, suddenly very aware of his truck's squeaky brakes. But then the front door opened, and Ruby came running out, still in her pajamas, screaming, "They're here! They're here!" And Sydney appeared behind her, wearing jeans and a sweater and bare feet, looking more like a regular mom than a foundation heiress. She waved them in with a huge smile, and suddenly the size of the house didn't matter. Inside was warm and smelled like cookies and pine. A Christmas tree that had to be 12 feet tall dominated the living room, but it was decorated with a chaotic mix of expensive ornaments and obvious kid-made crafts. Photos everywhere, Ruby as a baby, Sydney with her parents, candid shots of laughter and love. It was elegant but lived in, rich but real. "I made cookies," Ruby announced, dragging Aria and Lily toward the kitchen. "They're shaped like snowmen, but some of them look like blobs." "Blob cookies are the best cookies," Lily assured her. and they disappeared in a flurry of giggles. Sydney turned to Evan with a slightly embarrassed smile. "So, this is home. I know it's a lot." "It's beautiful," Evan said honestly. "But I get why you don't lead with this." "Yeah." "Nothing says I'm relatable like a 6-bedroom colonial." She gestured for him to follow. "Come on, I'll give you the tour." Fair warning, most of the rooms are empty. It was my parents' house. I kept it for Ruby, but it's too big for just the two of us. They walked through rooms that belonged in magazines, a library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a dining room with a table that could seat 20, a conservatory with more plants than Evan had ever seen in one place. But in every room, there were signs of Sydney and Ruby: a blanket fort in the library, crayons on the dining room table, a toy truck abandoned in the conservatory. "I know what you're thinking," Sydney said as they returned to the main living area. "Why not sell it? Move somewhere smaller?" And the answer is I don't know. Guilt, obligation, fear of letting go of the last piece of my parents? She sat on the couch and patted the spot next to her. "This house is beautiful, but it's lonely. It echoes. And I keep thinking that what Ruby needs isn't space, it's people. Laughter, life." Evan sat down beside her. "Is this where you tell me you're selling everything and moving into a tiny house?" Sydney laughed. "God, no, I'm not that enlightened. But maybe." She turned to look at him. "Maybe it doesn't have to be so lonely. Maybe there's room for more than just echoes." Before Evan could respond, the girls came racing back in, covered in cookie crumbs and giggling about something that only made sense to them. They climbed onto the couch between Evan and Sydney, a tangle of limbs and excitement, and suddenly the huge room felt smaller, cozier, more like a home. They spent the afternoon doing exactly nothing special and everything important. The girls played. The adults talked. They ate blob cookies and drank hot chocolate. They watched a Christmas movie with all 5 of them squeezed onto one couch, even though there were 3 other couches they could have used. Ruby fell asleep on Lily's shoulder. Aria taught Sydney a card game. Evan caught Sydney watching him with soft eyes more than once. As evening approached, and Evan knew they should leave, Ruby woke up just long, enough to make all 3 girls pinky swear they'd see each other again soon. Sydney walked them to the door, and in that moment of transition between inside and outside, between afternoon and evening, she took Evan's hand. "Thank you for coming," she said, "for giving this a chance, for letting me be part of your Christmas. Thank you for inviting us, for being so—" Evan searched for the right word. "So real." "I want to keep seeing you," Sydney said quickly, like she was afraid if she didn't say it fast she'd lose her nerve. "If that's okay, I want to see where this goes." The girls clearly adore each other, and I think— She smiled. "I think I might be starting to adore their father." Evan's heart did that stupid thing again, where it forgot how to beat properly. "I'm starting to adore Ruby's mother," he admitted, "even if she does live in a castle." "Colonial estate," Sydney corrected. "Castles have turrets." "My mistake." They stood there grinning at each other like teenagers, until Lily yelled from the truck, "Dad, it's cold!" Then Sydney kissed him again, this time on the lips, just a brief sweet kiss that promised more to come. "I'll call you tomorrow," she whispered. "I'll answer," Evan promised. The drive home was full of the girls chattering about Ruby and the cookies and the giant tree, and could they please go back soon, please, please, please. Evan let them talk, only half listening, his mind stuck on that kiss and the way Sydney had said she was starting to adore him. When they got home and the girls were finally in bed, exhausted from the best Christmas ever, Evan sat in his chair by the tree and pulled out his phone. A text was waiting. "Today was perfect. You're perfect. Thank you for taking a chance on someone like me." He typed back, "Someone like you? You mean someone kind and funny and real and beautiful? Yeah, I think I can handle taking a chance on that. Today was perfect. You're perfect. Can't wait to do it again." 3 dots appeared. Then, tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after. Good. because I don't think I'm done getting to know Evan Smith. I have a feeling there's a lot more to discover. Evan smiled at his phone like an idiot. Same here, Sydney Ellis. Same here. Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. Something neither of them had planned for. They fell into a rhythm. Sydney would call in the morning while Ruby was at her grandmother's. They'd talk about nothing important and everything essential. In the afternoons, they'd meet at playgrounds or parks, the girls running wild while the adults stole moments of conversation. In the evenings, after the kids were in bed, they'd text until one of them fell asleep mid-sentence. They learned each other's rhythms. Sydney discovered that Evan was a morning person who made terrible jokes before his first coffee. Evan learned that Sydney sang off-key in the car and cried at commercials. They shared fears about raising daughters in a scary world. They swapped embarrassing parenting stories. They talked about grief and healing and learning to open your heart again after loss. And the girls? The girls became inseparable. Aria declared Ruby her honorary little sister. Lily and Ruby invented their own secret language. They had sleepovers and playdates, and enough giggling to power a small city. But here's the thing about new relationships. At some point, you have to decide if this is just a nice holiday fling or something that's going to last past New Year's. And as the calendar flipped toward January, that decision was coming fast. New Year's Eve arrived with the weight of endings and beginnings. Sydney invited Evan and the girls to a small gathering at her house, which Evan had learned meant maybe 20 people, instead of 200. But when they arrived, it wasn't a gathering at all. It was just Sydney and Ruby, the house dark except for candles and twinkle lights, a picnic spread out on the living room floor. "I lied," Sydney said with a sheepish smile. "There's no party. I wanted it to just be us. The 5 of us. Is that okay?" Aria and Lily squealed and ran to Ruby. Evan looked at Sydney and felt his heart crack open a little more. It's more than okay. They ate pizza on the floor because Ruby insisted that's how all the best parties happened. They played board games and charades and watched the countdown on TV. And when it got close to midnight, Sydney sent the girls upstairs to Ruby's room, with sleeping bags and snacks and instructions to stay up as late as they wanted. Then it was just Evan and Sydney, sitting on the couch, watching the final minutes of the year tick away on the screen. "Can I tell you something?" Sydney asked. "Anything. I didn't think this would happen. After my husband died, I convinced myself I was done, that Ruby was enough, that I didn't need or want anyone else." She turned to look at him. "And then a random guy helped my lost daughter at an amusement park and completely wrecked my carefully constructed walls." Evan took her hand. "Want to hear something crazy? I was thinking the same thing. That I'd had my shot at love with Emily, that I should just focus on being a dad. That romance was for other people, people who hadn't already used up their quota of happiness." He laughed softly. "And then this woman in a fancy coat made me realize that maybe we get more than one chance. Maybe the universe doesn't work on quotas." The countdown started on TV. 10, 9, 8. "Evan?" Sydney whispered. "Yeah? I'm falling for you, really falling. And it terrifies me." 7, 6, 5. "It terrifies me too," Evan admitted. "But I'm falling anyway." 4, 3, 2. "Happy New Year," they said together, and then they were kissing, really kissing. The kind of kiss that felt like a promise and a question all at once. The kind of kiss that said, "This is real and I'm scared and I'm here anyway." When they finally pulled apart, fireworks were exploding on the TV and probably in the real world, too. But all Evan could focus on was Sydney's smile and the way her eyes shone in the candlelight. "So," she said, "New year, new beginnings. What do you say we make this official? You and me, actually dating, seeing where this goes?" "I say yes," Evan replied without hesitation. "I say absolutely yes. Even though I'm wealthy and complicated and come with a massive house and a foundation to run, especially because of all that. Because underneath all of it, you're just Sydney. And I really, really like just Sydney." She kissed him again, softer this time. "I really, really like just Evan too. They stayed up until 3 in the morning, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and breaking them and making new ones. They talked about introducing each other to friends, about how to handle questions from curious people, about whether they were moving too fast and deciding they didn't care, about the fact that yes, this was complicated and scary and probably a little bit crazy, but maybe the best things in life were all of those things. When Evan finally drove home as the sun was starting to rise on the first day of the new year, the girls asleep in the back seat, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Certainty. Not certainty that everything would be easy or perfect, but certainty that this, whatever this was with Sydney, was worth fighting for. Over the next few months, they built something real. Sydney came to Evan's work sites and brought lunch, not caring that she got dust on her expensive clothes. Evan attended foundation meetings, learning the language of philanthropy, surprising Sydney with good ideas for community programs. The girls started calling each other sisters. Ruby began asking if Mr. Evan could come to her school events. Aria and Lily asked when Miss Sydney was coming over next. There were challenges, of course. Photographers at one of Sydney's events caught them together, and suddenly, Evan was Sydney Ellis's mysterious new man in the local society pages. Some of Sydney's social circle made snide comments about her downgrading. Some of Evan's friends asked if he was becoming too fancy for them now. But they weathered it, together, because that's what you do when you find someone worth keeping. You weather the storms. And then came a Saturday in late March, unseasonably warm and sunny. Sydney called Evan and asked if he and the girls wanted to come over for a barbecue. Nothing fancy, just family. Family. They'd been using that word more lately, testing it out, seeing how it fit. When they arrived, Sydney had transformed her backyard into something magical. A bounce house for the girls, a grill smoking with burgers and hot dogs, a playlist of music from their childhoods. Ruby ran out screaming with joy, followed by 2 new friends from school. Aria and Lily joined the chaos immediately. Sydney pulled Evan aside to a quiet corner of the yard. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, and Evan's heart skipped because those words never meant anything good. "Okay," he said cautiously. "The foundation is doing a major expansion. New programs, new facilities. It's going to take a lot of my time over the next year." She took his hand. "And I need to know if you're in this for real, if we're doing this for real, because if we are, I want to stop tiptoeing around it. I want to tell people you're my partner. I want Ruby to know that you and the girls are permanent fixtures in our lives. I want—" She took a breath. "I want us to talk about what a future looks like. Together." Evan's brain went blank. Future. Together. These were big words. Scary words. The kind of words that meant forever. "Sydney," he started, and she jumped in. "I'm not asking you to marry me. Not yet. I just need to know if that's even on the table. If this is something we're building toward, or if we're just having fun until it gets too complicated." "Are you kidding?" Evan pulled her closer. "Sydney Ellis, I've been waiting for you to have this conversation. Yes, I'm in this for real. Yes, I want a future with you. Yes, I want our girls to be sisters. Yes, to all of it." He kissed her forehead. "I love you. I don't think I've said that yet, but I do. I love you." Sydney's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too, so much. And I'm so glad you found Ruby that night, because if you hadn't, I might have spent the rest of my life wondering if this kind of love was real." "It's real," Evan assured her. "We're real." From across the yard, 3 girls' voices called out in unison. "Are you guys being mushy?" They laughed and pulled apart, both wiping their eyes. "Maybe a little," Sydney called back. "Gross." The girls chorused, but they were smiling. That night, after the barbecue was over and the girls were exhausted from playing, Sydney walked them to their truck. Evan buckled Lily in while Aria climbed into the front seat. Sydney leaned against the driver's door and looked at him with so much love it almost hurt. "Thank you," she said, "for taking a chance on me, for seeing past all the rest of it, for being exactly who you are. Thank you for stopping me that night at Winter Wonderland," Evan replied. for being brave enough to ask for coffee, for letting me into your world. Our world, Sydney corrected. It's our world now. Our world, Evan agreed. And as he drove away, watching Sydney wave from the driveway of her big house that didn't feel quite so lonely anymore, Evan thought about that December night that had started all of this. A lost little girl, a scared mother, a simple decision to help. One act of kindness had changed everything. It had brought two broken families together and made them whole. It had proven that love doesn't care about bank accounts or social status, or whether you drive a truck or a Mercedes. It had shown that sometimes, when you least expect it, the universe puts exactly the right person in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And maybe that's what Christmas miracles really are. Not magic or divine intervention. Just ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Choosing kindness. Choosing courage. Choosing love. Evan Smith had chosen to help a crying child on a cold December night. And that choice had led him here, to a future he never imagined. To a woman who saw him for exactly who he was and loved him anyway. To a blended family that felt like it had always been meant to exist. So here's the question I want to leave you with. What simple act of kindness have you been putting off? What small gesture could you make today that might change someone's life? Because you never know. You never know when stopping to help a stranger might lead to something extraordinary. When a moment of compassion might create ripples that extend far beyond what you can see. Evan didn't set out to find love that night at Winter Wonderland. He just set out to help a scared little girl find her mother. Everything else was just the universe saying thank you. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, the universe's thank you comes in the form of a second chance at happiness, a new beginning, a family we didn't know we were building, all from one simple act of kindness. Now, I want to hear from you. This story proves that small acts of kindness create massive ripples in ways we can't predict. So, here's my challenge. Think about someone in your life who helped you when they didn't have to. Someone who stopped to care when it would have been easier to walk away. Drop their name in the comments below. Tell me what they did. Let's create a thread of gratitude.